First up this morning, let's get back to this budget situation. Charlie Trump is a Republican senator. He's actually chair of the Judiciary Committee on the Senate side, a Republican from Morgan County. Charlie, good morning. How are you, sir?
Hoppy, good morning.
All right, Charlie, Friday on this program, Chris Stadelman, who is Director of Communications for the governor, speaks for the governor, said that this budget, which the Republicans in the House and Senate passed, is, quote, completely unworkable. It's an irresponsible plan. It's not one that the governor can support. A veto is pending once he gets the budget. Your reaction?
Well, I'm disappointed, and I hope the governor reconsiders. I don't think it's helpful to use words like irresponsible in describing it. It is a budget that fully funds the operations of state government, the essential operations. And although, like the governor, I wish it utilized less rainy day money, you used the term in your intro, fiscal cliff, and I think that's an appropriate term, Hoppy. What, in my judgment, would be the most irresponsible thing we could do would be to have the government shut down on July 1st.
Mm-hmm. So you don't think some of the language – I get a drift, though, that the governor's office is – I think everybody's frustrated. But the governor, I thought, made pretty clear, or at least they think they've made it pretty clear, Charlie, that they would never sign a budget that included that much one-time money. And there's something like $240 million in one-time money, $180 million of that from Rainy Day Fund, in the budget, which means that when you do that, you immediately have a hole in the 2018 budget. So I think, and I'm not taking their side, I'm just saying why I believe that they have identified it as fiscally irresponsible.
Well, let's and I don't want to get into a finger-pointing game,
okay.
But the truth, Hoppy, is that Governor Tomlin sent to the legislature a budget that spends $270 million more than the revenues that are going to flow to the state based on existing taxes.
Well, they would say the numbers are changing and that you have to account for the changing numbers because of the decline in the economy.
That's absolutely true. That's why we're in the situation we're in. The state is suffering economically, and its citizens are. But the governor sent us a budget that was $270 million out of balance when it arrived in the legislature.
Charlie Trump is with us. He's the chairman of the Judiciary Committee in the state Senate. The House and Senate with Republican majorities have passed a budget. Governor Tomlin is expected to veto it. But the governor's budget included tax increases. So there's no tax increases in this budget. So let's go to that. The Senate passed tax increases. You give me a way forward because he's going to veto this thing. I mean, what do you think the best way forward is?
Well, here's what I think.
Okay.
I think we can pass a budget that will lower the amount by which the rainy day fund monies are utilized. I'd be willing to vote again, as I did before, for a 45-cent tobacco tax. Hoppy, that raises about $75 million, so you could reduce the utilization of rainy day money by $75 million. There are other things the legislature could do to reduce the utilization of rainy day money if the governor would add those to the call. There's $5 to $10 million that could be utilized in the racing modernization funds.
Right.
There's $15 million or so that exists in the budget in subsidies for greyhound purses and breeders. If the governor would add those measures to the calls, we could get to $100 million pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. $100 million in additional cuts in the cigarette tax, or where'd the $100 million come from? I'm sorry.
Well, $75 million is raised by a 45-cent tobacco tax.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And about $25 million in these other measures.
So you could change you could change what this budget, what the House and Senate budget looks like. You could change it by $100 million or ease it by $100 million with that tax increase and going and getting the money from the dogs.
And I'd be willing to do that. And I think, I don't know. I only get one vote in the Senate and none in the House. But, we were close on the 45-cent tobacco tax when we voted on it. It passed in the Senate with pretty overwhelming support from Republicans. Unfortunately, we only had one Democrat who voted for it in the Senate. That was Senator Palumbo. And the Republican majority in the House passed it by a fairly significant majority, 2-1, with virtually no Democratic support and not enough to get it across the finish line.
Right.
So
I think that, Charlie, I think we know, though, that the real issue here is going to be whatever comes up, particularly if the governor's going to veto this, then, and he's going to come back with a budget that's going to have a tax increase in there, probably a cigarette tax increase, maybe 45 cents, maybe 65 cents, maybe 75 cents, I'm not sure, which any of those could probably get through the Senate. The issue then is the House, because the House could not pass a 45-cent increase. Even Republicans pulled away. A number of Republicans pulled away from that. A number of House Democrats, they say they want $1, but there's probably a third of the Democratic delegation that doesn't want anything at all or wants higher than $1. So how do you find the votes? And you formerly served in the House. How do you find the votes in the House for a revenue increase, which I sense that certainly the governor wants, the Senate would go along with? How do you find the votes in the House?
Well, Hoppy, if you look at the vote that occurred already in the House on the 45-cent tobacco tax, there were in excess of 40 Republicans that voted for it. Mm-hmm. And I think only one Democrat out of 34 members of the Democratic caucus that decided for whatever reasons, Hoppy, to obstruct and block that revenue measure.
Well, I think there's 36 Democrats, but I know what you're saying, and the one that crossed over was Democrat Patsy Treecroft from Harrison County. However, they argue that if you just do 45 cents, you're really just putting a very temporary patch on it, and if you're going to do it, raise it by $1, which should help on the health front, but also bring in enough revenue that you're not facing the same problem when you start working on the budget for the next fiscal year. That's their argument.
Well, their argument is flawed for a couple reasons. One, it's whether it's 45 cents or 50 or 65 or $1, we're not talking about a temporary measure. So temporary would not be accurate. The problem with going higher, Hoppy, is that there's a law of diminishing returns on this.
Sure. And
what happens is you don't raise the exact same amount of money for every cent that you go up. It diminishes. So we have to be mindful not only of balancing our budget, which is paramount, but of putting retailers out of business in West Virginia.
Word here. I'm not putting this on you. I'm just saying that in general, because the governor's going to veto this budget. He's going to come out with his own budget. I suspect that if he comes out with his own budget and there's a tax increase in there, then additional responsibility falls to him and his party to whip the votes, and then Republicans, if they can bring themselves to it, getting behind some modest tax increase, if you will, to try to make this thing work. What is your take?
I agree, and I'm willing to look at further cuts in the budget too. I agree with the governor, Hoppy, that heavy utilization of the rainy day fund is problematic. But I would say this. There is absolutely no reason why we couldn't go ahead and have signed into law the budget we passed and continue to work on revenue measures. And I don't know what that answer is, whether it's 45 cents or 65 cents that gets it across a finish line and could bring additional revenue to the Treasury. It can be done after the budget, and it would avoid the specter that looms out there of shutdown. I hope your listeners understand what that means. It means that people who spent their lives working for the state of West Virginia and are retirees would not receive their monthly retirement checks. It means state employees would not be paid. It means the state's creditors, the bonded indebtedness of this state, would not be paid. We've heard a lot of talk about how heavy use of the rainy day fund could affect in a negative way the state's credit rating, but it's nothing like the effect that will happen if this government shuts down and the state doesn't pay its creditors beginning July 1st.
So
it will take a generation to recover from that sort of catastrophe.
A generation?
I think so.
Senator Charlie Trump is with us, a Republican from Morgan County and chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. So your thought is, and I've heard this opined by others, that pass a budget, which is just a framework, not a framework, it is a budget. And then that ensures that there'll be a budget on July 1, and it does not preclude working on additional revenue or a tax increase. So that's your thought, and the thought of some others I've heard. But if you do that, then that's sort of with the understanding or the imprimatur that you need some additional revenue, but would there be any impetus to pass any additional revenue if there's already a budget in place? See what I'm saying?
I understand. I understand exactly what you're saying, and for my part, and for my colleagues, I'm willing to work. I'm willing to continue to work to find the path forward, as you say, to solve this problem. And I think ultimately, in fairness, it's definitely going to have to involve some revenues to the Treasury. The governor, I'll give him some credit, Hoppy. He showed some political courage by proposing revenue measures, tobacco tax increase, sales tax increase, different options for the legislature to consider. I think there are other options we could consider. I mentioned a couple. I wish the governor would add those to the call and permit them to be considered by the legislature. But we're going to need some help from the Democratic caucus to get even a 45-cent tobacco tax across the finish line. Finally,
Charlie, and clearly you and there are other Senate Republicans who will get on board with some revenue increase. There was 43 Republicans in the House that would. Still, there are a number of Republicans in the House who say, cut spending, cut spending more. Why can't you, these are your fellow Republicans, why can't you cut more than what is being cut now? Or can you?
Well, the arithmetic is possible. The arithmetic is not complicated. It's a question, Hoppy, of what you can get 18 votes in the Senate for and 51 votes in the House, and then get the governor to agree to it. The budget that we passed includes about $122 million in cuts to various programs and operations of the state government from the previous fiscal year's budget. Now, I'm willing to go deeper and harder, but the cuts they have an effect too. They have an effect too. If we reduce the school aid formula, if we reduce the number of state troopers, you can cut into those operations, but there are consequences of those cuts. Now, I'm willing to roll up my sleeves. In fact, that's what I've been doing this morning, Hoppy. I've been, combing through this budget, looking for ways to cut further and deeper. The political reality is that every dollar the state spends, there's an advocate for somewhere, and sometimes many, many advocates. But what is unacceptable to me is to have the whole thing come to a complete halt on July 1st.
Senator Charlie Trump, the Republican Morgan County Chair of Senate Judiciary. Charlie, always a pleasure. Thank you for coming on Talkline today.
Hoppy, thank you. And if you have John Lowry on, congratulate him for me on his 12th state championship.
I will do that. Thank you, sir. Senator Trump from Morgan County, yeah.